Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of SciChat. Now, of course, I explain a little bit about what SciChat is every week. I just want to make sure, in case we have any new folks to SciChat, they understand what it is. So it's two parts. One part is what you're listening to right now. This is a weekly, about 30 minutes or so, recorded webinar of data about a specific topic in marketing, oftentimes social media marketing, but not always, just sort of more general inbound marketing topics. This week's topic is social sharing. And then the other part, I think, is actually much more cool, right? Because as fun as it is to listen to me talk about data and stuff about a topic, I think it's even more fun that we've got a Facebook group, SciChat, SCICHAT, so if you go to Facebook and search for that, you'll find it, that is a collection of more than 1,000 scientifically minded marketers. That is, marketing folks who are really interested in applying science, applying the scientific method, using real data, using experimentation to do their jobs as marketing and communications professionals. So after you listen to this webinar, this recorded video about social sharing, jump on over to the Facebook group where we will have a discussion about some of the things we've talked about during this week's episode of SciChat. Of course, we release these every Monday morning. And so, like I said, this week's edition of SciChat is going to be about social sharing. Okay, but we're going to approach it. I mean, if you've heard me speak before, you know that I do this social media science, unicorns and rainbows bit. I like to call unicorn hunting. But normally, when you hear about social sharing, especially with the word share, you get this very altruistic kind of thought process behind it. And that's not to say that sharing content isn't an altruistic endeavor, right? Because if you find something that's really interesting, you want to share it to other people, right? Because if you find it interesting, they'll probably find it interesting. If you've gotten value from it, they'll probably get value from it. But the social media scientist in me sees a unicorn and rainbow superstition and myth in that model. Well, it sounds good. It's truthy sounding, right? It's not entirely true, because at the core of that altruistic concept of sharing behavior, there's this idea that we share content because it's good, right? And that is fundamentally untrue. In fact, I've sat in front of a lot of, or not in front of, but at a lot of conference tables, a lot of meetings, marketing folks who should know better, honestly, good marketing folks, and had a lot of conversations that were started with, let's make something viral. Those aren't frustrating conversations because I don't like the word viral, or I don't think that we should plan for viral and those kind of things. They're frustrating conversations because the next thing that somebody says in that meeting, if you ask them, well, what makes something viral? Like that video you sent to me, what makes it viral? The best answer anybody's going to give you is because it was good. It was funny or interesting, right? Usually it's about good. But if you've ever seen a Rebecca Black video, you know that good isn't necessarily always the reason that people share things. And so as a social media scientist, I like to go beyond those unicorns and rainbow superstitions and myths and into why do people share things? Beyond just the word good, why do people share things? Now, there are a couple tools that we're going to talk about today that I think are super interesting. One is a little bit older and one is brand new. This is the brand new one. It's called socialsharecheck.com. If you go there, it'll direct you to a Chrome installation page in the Google Store where you can install a simple little Chrome app. Now, this app is not the end of all of your searches in marketing software, but it's a simple little tool that with one click in Chrome on any URL will tell you how many times that page has been shared on the 4 major social sharing networks: Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Google+. Now, many sites have those buttons on their site, which makes it easy to figure out how many times a page has been shared, but a lot of times pages don't. And that's basically just what this button does. So, as I said, it's not the most important tool in your arsenal, but it can be an important tool in your arsenal. If you're looking at a site trying to figure out if you should do guest blogging for them, if you're looking at a site trying to figure out, how did this kind of content do on my competitor's site? Is it something that the market seems to really like, but they don't have the buttons? Then you just, you click the social share check button, and it will tell you. The other tool is a little bit older, but is a bit more in depth, and we'll get to that as we talk about it. Now, let's start with Facebook sharing. What I did is I collected a data set of lots and lots of pages, lots and lots of articles written across the web, so like on news sites and on blogs and things like that. And then I found how many times they were shared on Facebook. Now, this isn't Facebook content, like content that was posted just to Facebook and how many times that was shared. This is actually content posted outside of Facebook and then shared to Facebook, right? Because there's an interesting discussion to be had about, can you have a presence on a social network just through your content and not through actually having an account, right? Because you can get a lot of traffic to your site on Twitter if you're making content on your site that goes viral on Twitter, gets a lot of retweets, and send a lot of people to your site without ever having a Twitter account. Much like you could have a Facebook presence, you could have articles that go viral, get shared a lot on Facebook, send a lot of traffic to your site, do a lot of good things for your business, and you don't even have a Facebook page. So in the purpose of studying that, or towards the purpose of studying that, I analyzed linguistic content type on those articles and then compared those content types to how often they were shared on Facebook, how many times they were shared on Facebook. Linguistic content types are basically, I combined two linguistic analysis algorithms. One is called LIWC, Linguistic Inquiry and Word Count. The other one is called RID, Regressive Imagery Dictionary. Basically, these are two linguistic systems created by academics at universities who are much smarter than I am. I did not invent them. I just applied them to Twitter. And they allow you to break content down or analyze content, kind of score content based on how much of it fits into one of these categorical buckets here. Now, as you'll see, the most shared kind of content on Facebook is, of course, sexual content. Now, it's not particularly useful for most marketers, right? Being a sexy marketer isn't something that a lot of us can do. But what I think is interesting is if you look at the second most shareable kind of content versus the least shareable kind of content, positivity does a lot better than negativity. People don't go to social media generally to get bummed out about the world around them. They have the news for that. Generally speaking, people go to social media to talk to their friends and have a good time, laugh at things, And, one time I presented data like this, and this was a long time ago. It wasn't this exact data, but it was something similar. At a Government 2.0, like an open government conference in Washington, D.C., and it was right around the time that the Gulf was filling with oil from the hole in the well there. And, I had somebody raise their hand and said, Dan, we can't always be positive. Like, sometimes bad things happen. We have to talk about them. And my response was, yes, but if you think about crises and the response on social media, typically the things that do the best are the things that, like for the Haiti earthquake, it's like text whatever to donate to this cause. Stories of hope, stories of recovery, stories of what you can do. Finding the silver lining in negative stories is probably what you should aim for. Now, another kind of study I did on that same data set, again, this is articles off Facebook that were shared to Facebook, and what I found is that when you apply something called readability, now readability is a measure of the complexity of language, meaning what grade level do you have to have completed in school to be able to read a piece of content? The more complex the language, arguably the higher your educational level would need to be for you to be able to understand it. So as this number increases, the complexity of the language is also increasing. So as the complexity of the language increased, as the readability essentially went down, so did social sharing. Went down. Facebook sharing. Meaning the more complex the language was, the less it was shared on Facebook. Right? So really, when you're writing for Facebook or writing for any network generally, you need to think about writing simply. Now, I'm not saying write dumb. There's a difference between writing simply and plainly and writing dumb. In fact, simple and plain writing is good writing. One of my favorite books, and I talk about it a lot, is called Strunk and White, Elements of Style. I actually have a first edition in my collection. It is the classic of American writing style. And one of its core tenets is to write simply and plainly. Right? That's good writing. Not dumb writing, good writing, simple and plain. Cut down on the unnecessary complexity, cut down on the unnecessary syllables, shorten sentence lengths, etc. And then when you actually go to Facebook content itself, meaning I have a data set of thousands and thousands of the top most liked Facebook pages, and then I looked at all the posts on their walls and analyzed various factors in those posts that were correlated with those posts having a higher than average action rate. And when I say action rate, what I mean is, so for in the first pair of bars here, it's likes. So that's likes on a specific post divided by the total number of likes for that page. right? So likes on a post divided by fans, basically. And then in the case of comments, total number of comments on a post divided by total number of fans of the page, and same thing with shares. And what I found is that questions tend to get more comments, tend to get more activity. Now, the thing with comments are they're not exactly a share, which is the topic of this discussion here. But in Facebook, generally, if I'm going to comment on something on a page, either on my friend's page or on a brand's page, there's a good chance that it's going to show up in the news feed for all of my people who are friends with me. Right? And so there is some sharing element to commenting on Facebook. And of course, asking questions encourages people to answer in the comments. So then you may ask me, Dan, what kind of questions should I ask? Well, I'm glad you asked me that, SciChatters. Generally, the easier to answer questions are the best. So should, would, and which are at the top of the list of the most commented on questions. Excuse me. Those are multiple choice or yes or no questions, right? Those are questions that can be answered either by a quick yes, quick no, or a quick selection from a list of options. At the bottom of this list, you see the least liked comment, or least commented on question types. You see how and why. And those are things that are going to take a lot more time to think about, to formulate an answer, and a lot more time to actually, excuse me, actually answer, because it's going to be a bit more typing, etc., that you're going to have to do. And then, when we go a bit further, and a question is sort of an implicit call to action, because when you ask a question, you're not saying answer this, but simply by asking it, you basically are saying answer it, but in an implicit way. And so when you look at more explicit calls to action, like posts that include the word like, they tend to get more likes. And the number of shares and comments are basically the same, but they tend to get more likes. Posts that include the word comment actually get more likes and comments, a little bit more likes, a lot more comments, and a bit fewer shares. And again, with any of these liking or comment behaviors on Facebook, while it's not explicitly a quote share, there is some sharing element to it, because if I like or comment on some piece of content, there's a good possibility that content is going to show up in my newsfeed as, such and such a friend commented on this, or such and such a friend liked this. And then, of course, the next logical place to look is posts that include the word share get more shares. They also get a significant number more likes. The comment rate's about the same, but they do get a significant percentage more shares. Meaning, when you want somebody to share your content, it is social calls to action that are important. Not only social calls to action, but social calls to action are one of the most important things you can do to get people to share your content, right? It's not necessarily only about the content being good, right? Good is too simplistic of a term. When you ask people to do something, they tend to do it. And so I did an experiment once, and in this experiment, it was questioning social proof, right? And what I did was I looked at subscriber numbers. Meaning, back in the day, there used to be this thing on the web called FeedBurner, where you would subscribe to a blog and decide to read it, and if you wanted to share it later, etc. But what I did is I faked these numbers, and I showed a source. I showed one button where it said that I had a lot of subscribers, and another button that said I had very few subscribers, and I split tested them. Like half people came to the site I showed one version of the button, half people came to the site I showed the other version. Now the confidence intervals are kind of low here, so take that for what it's worth. But there is some preference. There's, say a 67, almost 70% possibility that preference is true, and in this case, it's a little more than 60% possibility that preference is true. But there seemed to actually be more preference for social sharing at that source level. Right? Now, in other studies that I've done, social proof isn't so important at the sort of individual content piece level, right? Seeing that an article has been shared a lot of times isn't necessarily going to make me want to share it anymore. But seeing that a source of content is a trusted source will make me want to share content from that source. So social proof works to encourage sharing when that social proof is at the source level, not the content level, right? Because nobody wants to be the 1,000th person to tweet an article. Everybody wants to be the first person to tweet an article from a safe source, from a source that has already been sort of socially validated through a large subscriber number. So in the case that you have a lot of Twitter followers, you have a lot of blog subscribers, you have a lot of email subscribers, you have a lot of Facebook likes, it can sometimes be helpful to at least experiment with emphasizing that social proof at the source level, not saying things like 30,000 people have retweeted this tweet or have retweeted this video or this piece of content, but 100,000 people like us, check out our new content, right? That sort of thing is another way to use a sort of implicit and an explicit call to action with a motivator. And then when we switch gears on over to Twitter, what we find is that when we compare percentage of tweets retweeted for a large number of Twitter accounts, that is, how many of their tweets were retweeted once or more, right? And we look at the percentage of their tweets that contain a link. What we find is that accounts that are sharing between 60 to 80% links, where 60 to 80% of their tweets contain a link, those are the ones that have the highest tweets, the highest number of tweets that are retweeted, right? The highest average tweets retweeted. And really the sweet spot is sort of between 20 and 90%, but it really starts to peak over to the right of the graph, and then it cuts off at, when you're sharing 0 links, 0% links, you're really not going to get a whole lot of retweets. If you're only sharing links, that's also dangerous because you look a little spammy. But the important part of that is then to contrast that with reply percentage. So here the vertical axis again is percentage of tweets retweeted, and the horizontal axis, the bottom axis, instead of percentage of tweets that contain a link, this is percentage of tweets that start with an @ sign. What we find is that basically the fewer amount of replying you're doing, the lower the percentage of reply tweets your account is sending, the higher the retweets per tweet tend to be. Right? So if you're spending all your tweets, all your time on Twitter just replying, you're not going to be getting a whole lot of shares, right? Because replies tend to be very contextual, meaning they're only really relevant to the person you're sending it to, or maybe a few of their friends or a few more people. But generally speaking, replying isn't the kind of behavior that leads to a lot of sharing. And that's not to say that you should never reply, of course, but that is to say that you should not rely on it to build things like reach or sharing behavior. And of course, social calls to action, extremely important on Twitter as well. What I did here is I took 20,000, I believe the number was 20,000 randomly selected 20,000 randomly selected tweets, rather. They did not contain a link necessarily. Some did, some didn't. They're randomly selected. And I broke those tweets into 3 buckets. One bucket were tweets that contained the phrase, please retweet. A second bucket was tweets that contained the phrase, please RT. A third bucket was tweets that did not contain either one of those 2 calls to action. And then I looked at the percentage of those tweets that were retweeted once or more. What I found is that in the no call to action bucket, about 12% of those tweets were retweeted at least once, sometimes more. But in the please retweet bucket, 51% of those tweets were retweeted. So clearly, please retweet works. Social calls to action work. It is one of the simplest, most powerful, most foolproof ways to get more shares. Don't only rely on social calls to action, of course. Do listen to some of these other things that I'm telling you to experiment with. Do some of your own experimentation and testing. See what really works. But also, do not be afraid to ask people to share content you want them to share. It works. And then when we talk about time of day is a really interesting stat because I always caveat all my timing data with this. I'm not telling you a law that's set in stone, right? I'm not telling you that this is the only time of day you should be tweeting if you want to get retweets. What I'm telling you is that this is a time of day that in my very large data set seems to have some significance, right? There seems to be some statistical significance to this time of day as far as getting more retweets. And in fact, I've looked at this number across a large variety of data sets, and I've found that this time period, about 4 to 5 p.m. Eastern time, tends to be the time of day where things get the most retweets. Now, that's later in the day, and that's interesting because I think the effect that's happening here is that earlier in the day when I'm on Twitter, I've had my cup of coffee, I'm ready to go, the day hasn't really worn on me yet, and I might come up with some witty stuff, and I might be talking to people on Twitter, I might be, typing interesting things, coming up with my own witty tweets, hoping that I get a lot of retweets, but by the end of the day, that coffee's wearing off, gone through that 3 p.m. feeling, 3:30 p.m. Is that what it is? 2:30 p.m. Whatever the afternoon sloth is. And I've started to slow down. I've gotten less witty. It's the end of the day, so I'm just kind of messing around on the internet, right? It's 4:30 p.m., you know. That's when, if I see something funny, then I'm going to retweet it. And again, this is one of these stats where, that's the best explanation I have. That's not the most brilliant explanation in the history of explanations for data, but it's useful-ish sounding. And what the takeaway really is to experiment with it, because whenever I've experimented with it, both accidentally or intentionally, or other people have as well, a lot of other folks have noticed that is in fact the case. That sharing content around that time does seem to get more retweets, more Twitter shares than at other times of day. So definitely experiment with that and see how it works for you. Something else that is really key with Twitter sharing is the idea of self-reference. So self-reference is basically, you know what it means, like in a sense, but the way I looked at it here was the occurrence of words like I, me, we, us. So words where you're talking about yourself. And when you analyze non-retweeted tweets, that's just a sort of random selection of tweets that are not contagious, tweets that were not shared, that's that black bar there, versus a collection of tweets that were retweeted, that were contagious, that were shared. That's that orange bar there. What you find is that self-reference tends to be much lower in those tweets that are retweeted. Because if you're talking about yourself, there's a good chance it's not going to be particularly interesting to me, unless I know you personally, and even then it might not be all that interesting. But generally speaking, talking about yourself is not the kind of thing that leads to a lot of social sharing. Another similar analysis is with word novelty, right? So again, we have this random selection of tweets, that black bar, tweets that were not retweeted, versus the orange bar, which is tweets that were retweeted, were contagious, were shared. But the vertical axis here, instead of self-reference, is actually word novelty, word occurrence. So the word the has a very high word occurrence score. The word sesquipedalian has a very low word occurrence score, right? Because the happens a lot of times in normal language. Sesquipedalian happens very few times. Basically, retweeted tweets had a much lower word occurrence score, meaning they were more novel. They were using interesting words. They weren't saying the same things that everybody else was saying. Because again, if you're just saying the same things that everybody else is saying, why would I retweet you? Right? You're not adding anything new or interesting to the conversation. There's really no reason for me to retweet you. And then when we look at the words and phrases that occur in retweets with a much higher frequency than you would expect them to occur in retweets based on their occurrence in normal language, you find a selection of words that I call most retweetable. These words, there's several interesting points in the list. The word you is key. Again, that drives home that point about self-reference. I don't want to hear you talking about yourself. I want to hear you talking about me. What the content in your tweet can do for me. Right? Because I am a lot more interesting than you are, right? But you got to invert those nouns because, yeah. Twitter, talking about Twitter always works. Please and retweet, surprise, surprise. And again, number 11, please retweet. Free, number 8, always works. Talking about social media, always really big. And then, top 10 lists, 17 and 14, about how to, top 10 lists are chunked content, easy to read, typically very useful. How-to is also very, very useful content. New blog post indicates that, hey, I follow you because I like your blog. Right, social proof at the source level, and then new blog post means, oh, hey, this is a new piece of content, though. You can be one of the first people to retweet this if you like it. And then the number 19, check out. It's another social call to action. Check this out. Check out my new post. Right. But on the flip side of that coin, needs to get the least retweetable words, rather. And I'm not going to leave this chart up too long because it will bore you to sleep and I'll lose all my viewers. But it's a lot of really boring stuff like game, going, Basically, if I amalgamated all these words together, it'd be something like, I'm watching the game, then going to bed, it's really boring and I'm tired. That's super boring, super self-referential, and has zero to do with anything that I'm ever going to retweet. When you look at the length of retweets, you basically find that out to about 110, 120 characters, the longer the tweet, the more retweets you're going to get. Basically, because the more content, the more information you can pack in a tweet, the more likely it is that something in that tweet is going to motivate me to want to retweet it for you. I want to share that content. But once you get up past 110, 120, sometimes it can be hard for me to do the old school RT or add my own thoughts or something like that. So really, aim for 120, 110, 120 characters. Aim to use all that up with motivators, calls to action, interesting content, etc. but don't go too far, because if you get up to 139 characters, I like old school RTing. I don't really do new school RTs. I like old school RT, and you can't really old school RT something if it's 139 characters long. Hashtags. Tweets that have hashtags in them do tend to get more retweets. I think where this is useful is that if you're at an event, or if you're listening to a webinar, or you're tweeting about something that's happening live, like a TV show or something like that, using random hashtags like hashtag marketing, right? That's kind of silly. But using a hashtag about an event that's going on right now, which means that a lot of other people are watching that hashtag, right? That's interesting, because then what you're doing is not only are your followers going to see that, but there's a potential that all the people who are watching that hashtag are also going to see it. And so by increasing your potential reach, you increase your potential retweets, your potential shares. Quotes also work really well. Quotes are kind of like a piece of, they're like a link almost, right? In a way. And I know that sounds weird, but let me try to explain myself here. A link points you to a piece of content that is elsewhere, right? A link says, hey, I have this really interesting information. It's probably useful, valuable, etc., whatever, funny, whatever you want to call it. But it's somewhere else, and it's way too big to fit into Twitter. It's a reference to something. A quote is similar, because a quote typically is like you're quoting somebody famous or somebody else, and it's useful, it's interesting. A quote is indicating, hey, I got this content from somewhere else. It's a reference. It's that same kind of thing. It's like embedding. It's like a link that's not too long. You could just stick it. Like you wouldn't link to a quote that was under 140 characters, right? You would just quote it. So experiment with quotes. Those are the two kinds of content that I find tend to get the most retweets, just sort of anecdotally from me and some other folks that I've talked to. One is links, the interesting stuff, articles, tools, videos, whatever, images. And the other one is quotes. Either I'm quoting somebody else, or even if I quote myself, right? And I wouldn't put quotes around something if I'm quoting myself, but like just think of it like a quotable soundbite kind of thing. Like one of my favorite ones for me to tweet is marketing without data is like driving with your eyes closed. And then, like I said, images are also really useful as well. So if you use pic.twitter.com, which is Twitter's own image uploading system, like in some Twitter clients, there's a little camera thing, and you click it and you can upload an image. When you do that, and I view your tweet either on twitter.com or TweetDeck, and so whatever Twitter client I happen to be using, the image shows up right in your tweet, right? So it takes up a whole bunch of real estate. It's really eye-catching, and I'm going to see it, and I'm going to retweet it. And so, in fact, tweets that use pic.twitter.com are 94% more likely, almost twice as likely, to be retweeted than tweets that do not use that. On the other hand, Instagram links are like 42% less likely, because again, Instagram doesn't have that same integration. If I see that link, like, yeah, I might click it, it's interesting, blah, 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 but it's not going to show up in the Twitter client like pic.twitter.com. TwitPic links. TwitPic is a specific thing that's like built for Twitter, so it does show up again in the newsfeed. So it is 64% more likely to be retweeted when you use a TwitPic link versus when you do not. And then again, on the other hand, Facebook link. So Facebook CDN, which is Facebook's content delivery network. So if you were browsing like through your newsfeed and you right-click on somebody's image and you share it, it's going to link to Facebook CDN, and those tweets are typically much less likely, 47% less likely to be retweeted than if they did not include that. Because again, here you have something where it's not only is it not showing up like inside the Twitter client, like inside your tweet, but there's a good chance, depending on the privacy settings of the place that you got the photo from, that I may not be able to even see it. And the link looks super ugly. So that's really typically a bad idea. So generally, if you're going to try to share photos to Facebook, to Twitter, I recommend using pic.twitter.com, like Twitter's actual image uploading setup. So I love doing this kind of analysis, like, hashtags work really well, images work really well, quotes, blah, 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 time of day, readability, all this kind of stuff. But I do it across very, very large data sets. And as I said, your results may be different from the very large data set. What I'm telling you is not set in stone laws or things to experiment with. But if we go a step further, that's when it gets super interesting, right? Because the best data is your data. It's not necessarily just mine. Mine is stuff to experiment with, my big data. Your data is the most interesting data. So what I did is I created a little tool, retweetlab.com, and you go to retweetlab.com, you log in with Twitter, you can analyze your account. You can also analyze anybody else's account. I just had to have you log in so that you counts against your API calls, not against mine, because a lot of people use the tool, etc. But basically, you can do all the analysis that I've done, and some more, that I presented. Everybody loves day of the week, hour of day, for your account, or for your competitor's account, or for a partner's account. Right? Think about that. Think about all this data that I've showed you you could get for yourself in like 10 seconds. I was really excited when I launched this tool. It's a little bit older. It's been out for a little while, but I think it's super awesome. So again, that one is retweetlab.com. Go check it out. Let me know what you think. The other one, the new one, is socialsharecheck.com. That's just a Chrome plugin that'll help you determine with one click on any URL how many times that site has been shared on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Google+. So go check out those tools. Let me know what you think. Social Share Check is, of course, very beta still, so it's new, and we're still going to be improving it, making it better, whatever. But let me know what you guys think, and I look forward to talking to you more in the Facebook group SciChat this week. Thanks, everybody, for listening.